Tonight, we're not here to fix anything, not to understand everything, not to become someone better before you're allowed to rest. This is a quiet space where we gently let go and return to inner peace through soft Zen stories inspired by the Buddha, shared slowly so your mind can soften and your body can rest. Maybe today asked a little too much from you. Too many thoughts, too many worries, too many small things you tried to hold together. And maybe, just for this moment, you're ready to set them down. Here, you don't need to improve yourself. You don't need to solve tomorrow. You are already enough simply by being here, breathing quietly. Just for a moment. Where are you listening from tonight? Wherever you are, I'm grateful you're here, sharing this quiet space. Let your breath slow, as if it remembers the way home. Let your shoulders soften, like they no longer need to carry the world. Tonight, we'll listen to a simple story. A story from ordinary life, carrying a small thread of Zen and Buddhist wisdom. Not to give you more to think about, but to help you loosen your grip. Because suffering rarely ends by force. It softens when we stop holding it so tightly. There's nothing to rush, nothing to achieve, only a gentle drifting into rest, into stillness. Whether you stay awake or slowly fall asleep, this moment is already enough. And now, we begin tonight's journey with these Zen stories. The morning is colder than expected. Not the sharp kind that shocks you awake, but the steady, quiet cold that settles into everything. The parking lot outside the grocery store is almost empty. A thin layer of frost clings to windshields and shopping carts, turning ordinary metal into something briefly delicate. She sits in her car with the engine running, hands wrapped around the steering wheel, waiting for the heater to catch up. The windows are fogged just enough to blur the edges of the world outside. She could leave now. She doesn't need anything from the store. But she stays, letting the car warm, letting herself arrive. Across the lot near the edge where the pavement meets a strip of dirt and trees stands a tall pine. It doesn't belong here. Not really. It's taller than the others, darker. Its needles thick and full, even in this cold. The nearby trees have gone bare, branches thin and exposed. But the pine holds its color without effort. No announcement, no apology. She's noticed it before, usually in passing. Today she really looks. The snow from the night before still clings to its branches. Some of it has slipped off, fallen to the ground in uneven piles. But most of it remains resting there lightly, as if it's been allowed rather than endured. She exhales slowly. For the past years, she's been waiting for things to soften, waiting for life to feel more cooperative, waiting for support to show up in the ways she imagined it would, waiting for someone to notice how much she's been holding together on her own. She doesn't say this out loud. She barely says it to herself. But it's there underneath everything she does. The cold has made her cautious, careful. She's learned how to keep moving without slipping, how to brace without freezing. Still, there's a quiet ache that comes from feeling like you're the only green thing in a season that doesn't seem to care. The pine doesn't look lonely. It stands apart, yes, but not abandoned. It doesn't lean toward the other trees. It doesn't wait for them to change. It grows according to something older than weather. She thinks about how often she's delayed her own steadiness, telling herself she'll feel grounded once conditions improve. Once someone agrees, once the timing is right, once the season changes, as if she needs permission to stand. A shopping cart rattles across the lot, pushed by an employee in a heavy jacket. The sound echoes briefly, then fades. The world continues with or without her participation. She turns off the engine and steps out of the car. The cold bites at her face, immediately clean and honest. Her breath shows. She pulls her coat tighter, shoulders lifting out of habit. The ground crunches beneath her boots as she walks a few steps closer to the tree. Not all the way, just enough to feel its presence more clearly. There's sap on the trunk, hardened and amber-colored. The bark is rough under her gloved hand, solid. She notices how the pine hasn't waited for spring to be itself. It hasn't dropped its needles to match the others. It hasn't gone dormant to blend in. It stays green because that's what it does. Not as resistance, as nature. There's something both comforting and unsettling about that. She spent so much time adapting, softening when needed, withdrawing when it felt safer, changing her tone, her pace, her expectations, so she wouldn't stand out too much, wouldn't ask for too much, wouldn't be a burden in a hard season. Useful strategies, necessary ones. But they've started to feel heavy. She steps back, the cold already seeping through the soles of her boots. The pine remains where it is snow-dusted and steady, not asking her to learn anything from it. And yet, something shifts in her chest. Not a surge of confidence, not resolve, just a quiet recognition. She doesn't need a better season to be herself. She doesn't need warmth, approval, or ideal conditions to stand upright in her own life. The heater hums as she gets back into the car. The windshield slowly clears. The pine comes back into sharp focus, framed now by clean glass and pale winter light. She sits there a moment longer, hands resting loosely in her lap. The day will ask things of her soon enough. Decisions, interactions, small negotiations she's learned to manage well. But for now, there's this. A tree that stays green without asking spring for permission. And the beginning of a thought she hasn't finished yet. She finally pulls out of the parking lot, tires humming softly against the cold pavement. The grocery store fades behind her, replaced by quiet streets and pale winter light. The pine disappears from view, but the image of it stays with her longer than she expects. At the next red light, she notices how her shoulders are still raised, braced as if the cold followed her inside the car. She lets them drop just a little. The heater hums steadily now, filling the space with warmth she didn't have to work for. For a long time, she's believed strength meant flexibility. The ability to bend, to adapt quickly, to read the room and adjust herself before anyone had to ask. And that belief kept her safe. It helped her survive moments when standing out would have cost too much. But survival has a way of overstaying its welcome. Somewhere along the way, flexibility turned into constant self-editing. Strength became quiet endurance, and endurance slowly turned into a habit of waiting for things to ease before she allowed herself to be fully present. The pine didn't wait. It didn't resist the snow either. It held it. Let it rest on its branches until gravity decided otherwise. No drama, no collapse. Just a steady relationship with what arrived. She thinks about the last few months, the conversations where she swallowed words because it didn't feel like the right time. The plans she postponed because the support wasn't there yet. The way she's been living slightly folded in on herself, conserving energy, hoping the season would change soon. There's nothing wrong with hoping, but there's something tiring about postponing your own solidity. The light turns green. She drives on. At home, she sets her keys on the counter and shrugs off her coat. The house is quiet. Not empty, just still. She makes herself tea and waits for the kettle to boil, watching steam gather and drift upward. Outside the kitchen window, the same winter sky stretches overhead. Pale, open, unconcerned with how anyone feels about it. She carries the mug to the table and sits down. The chair creaks softly beneath her weight. It holds. No adjustment needed. She realizes how often she's mistaken standing alone for being unsupported. As if steadiness only counts when it's witnessed. As if being rooted without applause somehow makes it less real. The pine doesn't have an audience. It stands green because that's how it meets the world. Not to prove resilience. Not to inspire, just because that's its nature. The tea warms her hands. She takes a slow sip. The heat spreads easily without effort. She doesn't rush the moment. There's nothing she needs to prepare for right now. She thinks about what it would mean to stop waiting for ideal conditions. To stop negotiating her presence with the weather of other people's moods, to allow herself to be consistent, even when things around her feel uncertain or cold. Not rigid, just rooted. That idea feels different from the pressure she's known. It doesn't ask her to harden. It doesn't demand constant effort. It suggests something quieter. Something more honest, being herself even when it's not mirrored back. She sets the mug down and rests her hands on the table. They're steady, warm now. The day ahead still exists, so do its challenges. But they no longer feel like reasons to disappear. She doesn't make a promise to change. She doesn't rehearse a new version of herself. She simply notices that she's done waiting to be supported before she stands. Outside, the light shifts again. The morning moves on. Somewhere, snow slides from a branch and lands softly on the ground, unnoticed. And in the quiet of her kitchen, something settles into place. She can be green in winter. She can stand without spring. She can be herself fully without asking the season to agree. The rest will change when it does. She doesn't need to. He keeps a small piece of wood on a shelf in the garage. It started as nothing. A leftover block from a cheap set of shelves he built months ago. The kind of thing most people would toss into the trash without thinking. But he didn't. He slipped it onto the shelf and forgot about it until one Saturday afternoon when he found himself standing in the garage, again restless and slightly annoyed for reasons he couldn't explain. The garage is quiet in a very specific way. No music, no conversation, just the faint tick of the water heater in the corner and the occasional creak of the house settling. The overhead light buzzes softly and dust floats through the air when the door is half open. He pulls the block of wood down and turns it in his hands. It's rough on the edges, splintered in one corner, plain and unfinished. Nothing about it looks valuable. He thinks for a second that it matches the way he's been seeing himself lately. Not broken exactly, just not shaped right, not polished. Not the kind of person who seems to move through life cleanly. He has good days, and then days where he slips back into the same habits, the same thoughts, the same quiet disappointment. He sets the wood on the workbench and reaches for sandpaper. The sheet is old and curled at the edges, but it still works. He wraps it around the block and starts rubbing slow at first, then more steady as his arms find a rhythm. The sound is soft and repetitive. Scratch, scratch, scratch. A simple noise that doesn't demand anything from him. He hasn't called it healing. He wouldn't. That word feels too big, too serious. This is just something to do with his hands. Something physical so his mind doesn't have to keep circling the same stories. But the truth is, he's been trying to change. Not in the loud, inspirational way. More like someone quietly rearranging a room so they can breathe again. He's been trying to stop snapping at people when he's tired. Trying to drink less. Trying to stop scrolling late at night. Trying to stop talking to himself like an enemy. He's been trying. And it hasn't been clean. Some mornings he wakes up and feels proud for no reason. Other mornings he wakes up and the weight is back as if nothing changed at all. He'll do well for a week, then slide. He'll make progress, then get frustrated and wonder if he's fooling himself. The sandpaper keeps moving. The wood warms slightly under his hands. Tiny flakes fall onto the workbench, collecting like pale dust. He wipes them away with his palm, then keeps going. There's a thought that's followed him for years, quiet but sharp. If you were really better, it wouldn't take this long. If you were really strong, you wouldn't have to keep working this hard just to feel normal. He presses a little harder, then catches himself and lightens the pressure. Too much force digs, grooves into the surface. He knows that from experience. He's ruined things that way, before convinced that harder meant faster. But harder doesn't always mean better. He pauses and runs his thumb along the edge. It's smoother now, but not perfect. He can still feel roughness where the grain changes direction. He looks at it and feels a familiar urge to judge, to call it not enough, to toss it aside. Instead, he picks it up and turns it again, looking at it from a different angle. The light catches on the parts he's already smoothed. The rest is still raw. It occurs to him gently that he's been doing the same thing to himself. He keeps looking at the rough parts as if they cancel out everything else. He keeps treating the unfinished places like evidence that he shouldn't even be trying. as if being in process is somehow embarrassing. But the wood isn't ashamed of being a block. It doesn't pretend to be a table leg or a picture frame. It doesn't compare itself to the finished shelves nearby. It simply sits here ready to be shaped without hating what it is today. He sets the block down again and resumes sanding slower, more even. Scratch, scratch, scratch. The rhythm steadies his breathing. His shoulders drop. His jaw unclenches. He realizes he's been thinking of himself as the stone-heavy, stubborn, hard to change. But maybe he's also the hands. Maybe he's the one doing the shaping. Not all at once. Not perfectly. But consistently in small motions that add up. A car passes outside, tires hissing on the street. The sound fades. The garage remains. He keeps sanding, not because he believes he can become flawless, but because he's starting to believe that gentle work counts. He stops sanding when his arms start to feel it. Not pain, just that low, honest signal that says enough for now. He sets the sandpaper down and stretches his fingers, watching the fine dust cling to his skin. It leaves faint lines in his palm, settling into the creases like it belongs there. For a moment he considers wiping it off right away. Then he doesn't. He looks at the block of wood again. It's changed. Not dramatically. Anyone else might not even notice. But he does. The edges are softer. The shape feels calmer, somehow less defensive. It's still just a block, but it's no longer fighting his hands. He thinks about how often he's tried to rush himself. How many times he's told himself that by now he should be different. More disciplined, less reactive, past certain habits, past certain fears, as if there were a finish line he somehow missed, and now he's permanently behind. That pressure has never helped. It's only made him tense, careful in the wrong way, afraid to make mistakes because mistakes feel like proof. He leans back against the workbench and exhales. The garage smells faintly of sawdust and old paint. It's not a comforting smell exactly, just familiar, real. He realizes something that surprises him. Every time he's tried to change himself by force, he's treated himself like a problem to be solved. Something in the way, something resistant. But when he treats himself like material, something workable, something with grain and texture, everything shifts. Material isn't bad for having limits. It just has properties, directions it wants to move, places where it resists, and places where it yields easily. He picks the block up again and runs his thumb along the surface, this time without looking for flaws. Just noticing. The places where the grain curves. The places where sanding takes longer. The places that will never be perfectly smooth, no matter how much effort he puts in. And suddenly, that feels fine. He's spent years thinking healing meant erasing the rough parts, flattening himself into something universally acceptable, something easier to handle. But sculpting doesn't work that way. You don't remove everything. You remove what doesn't belong to the shape you're uncovering. He sets the block down and switches to a finer grit of sandpaper. The sound changes, softer now, more subtle. The work slows. It requires more attention, less force. This feels closer to how he wants to live. Less dramatic change, more precise care. He thinks about the habits he's been trying to let go of, the ways he pushes himself too hard, the voice that tells him rest is weakness, the urge to become someone else instead of becoming clearer as himself. Maybe those aren't things to smash apart. Maybe they're just excess, old layers that once protected him but don't need to stay. He sands for a few more minutes, then stops again. The block is warm now, almost alive in his hands. He sets it upright on the bench, steps back and looks. It's still unfinished, and that doesn't bother him the way it used to. He doesn't feel the need to complete it today, or to decide what it will become. Shelf support, paperweight, nothing important. The purpose can wait. What matters is that the process feels honest. He brushes the dust off his hands and washes them at the small sink in the corner. The water runs cloudy at first, then clear. He watches it swirl down the drain and disappear. When he turns back, the block of wood sits quietly where he left it. No demand, no expectation. He switches off the overhead light and leaves the garage, closing the door behind him. Inside the house, things look the same as they did before. Couch, lamp, shoes by the door. Life unchanged in any obvious way. But he feels different. Not fixed, not transformed, just less at war with himself. He understands now that he doesn't have to choose between accepting himself and changing. He's always been both the stone and the sculptor, always shaping, always being shaped. And the work doesn't require cruelty. It requires patience, attention, and the willingness to stop removing things that were never the problem. He sits down and rests his hands on his knees. They feel steady, capable. Tomorrow he might sand again, or he might not. Either way, the block will still be there. So will he. And for the first time in a long while, that feels like enough. The bathroom light is too bright, but she leaves it on anyway. It's the only way to see what she's doing. The kid is in the tub, splashing gently with a plastic cup, making little waves that hit the sides and fall back again. The water is warm, the air is damp, and the mirror is already starting to fog around the edges. She kneels on the bath mat with a towel folded across her lap. One hand on the faucet, adjusting the temperature, the other steadying a bottle of shampoo so it doesn't tip. She moves in small, practiced motions, the kind you learn when you're doing 3 things at once without wanting it to feel chaotic. She's tired. Not the dramatic kind of tired where you're falling asleep standing up. The quieter kind. The kind that shows up in your shoulders, in the way your eyes stay a little tense, even when you're smiling, in the way your thoughts don't fully stop when the day is over. The kid laughs at something, maybe a bubble, maybe nothing. She laughs too automatically. It comes out soft. Real enough. She reaches into the tub and scoops a bit of water onto the kid's arm to rinse off soap. The water beads on the skin and runs down in thin lines. For a second, she watches it like she's never seen water before. A drop. Small, clear, unimportant looking. Her mind does what it often does when she's tired. It starts measuring. How much she did today, how much she didn't do, the messages she didn't reply to, the groceries she forgot, the fact that she still hasn't scheduled that appointment she keeps meaning to schedule, the way she snapped a little earlier when she didn't want to. She hates that part of herself, the part that keeps score, the part that acts like life is a test she's quietly failing. She takes a breath through her nose slow and looks back at the tub. The kid is making soup with bath toys, stirring the water with complete confidence. The plastic cup dips and rises, and the water keeps responding, patient and endless. It's strange how something so ordinary can feel so big when you're worn down. She wipes a bit of water off the kid's cheek with her thumb. The skin is warm, alive, right here. On the edge of the tub, a drop of water clings to the porcelain. It trembles slightly when the kid kicks. It holds on, then finally lets go, sliding down and disappearing into the bath water. And something in her shifts. Not like a breakthrough, more like a widening. She's been feeling lately like she's just one drop. One small person with limited energy, limited patience, limited time. A drop trying to handle an ocean of needs. Work, home, relationships, bills, expectations. The constant background noise of the world. No wonder she feels like she's not enough. A drop is not enough to be an ocean. But that's the wrong comparison. Because a drop isn't separate from the ocean. It's ocean in a smaller shape. The thought comes quietly without any spiritual language attached. Just a simple recognition, like remembering something she knew as a kid and forgot when life got complicated. She looks at her hands. They're damp. A little pruny at the fingertips from water. Not perfect hands. Hands that have done dishes, wiped noses, typed emails, held steering wheels, carried bags. Hands that have tried. She's been treating herself like a single unit that has to perform perfectly to deserve rest. Like her worth depends on how clean she keeps everything, how calm she stays, how much she can hold. But what if she's part of something larger than her daily performance? Not larger in a mystical way. Larger in the way life is larger than one moment. Larger than one bad day. Larger than one sharp tone. Larger than one mistake. A drop can look small when you isolate it. But when you see where it belongs, it stops being small. The kid splashes again, sending a wave over the edge. Water spills onto the floor. She reaches for the towel and wipes it up. No panic, no frustration, just a quick cleanup. She notices that she didn't get mad, not because she's enlightened, because she's tired enough to stop insisting everything be perfect. The floor can be wet for a moment. The world doesn't end. The towel handles it. That feels like a clue. Maybe she doesn't have to clamp down so hard on every detail to be okay. She rinses the kid's hair, watching suds run down and dissolve into the water. Soap is there, then it's gone. The water stays. She thinks about all the feelings she's had today, irritation, guilt, worry, and how she keeps assuming they're permanent. How she keeps acting like each emotion defines her, like each moment is a verdict. But emotions are more like soap. They show up, they swirl, and they dissolve. Something stays underneath them, something wider. She reaches for the cup and pours warm water gently over the kid's head. The kid squeezes their eyes shut and squeals, then laughs again. The sound bounces off the tile walls and lands in her chest, softening it. She looks at the water again, not as a task, as a reminder. She's not just a drop trying to survive the ocean. She's the ocean showing up as a drop, and that changes how the weight feels. She drains the tub slowly. The water circles the drain, pulling the remaining bubbles into a small spinning pattern before they disappear. The sound is steady and familiar, something she's heard hundreds of times before. Tonight she watches it a little longer than usual. The kid steps out wrapped in a towel, warm and clean, and already reaching for pajamas. She dries small arms and legs, the movements automatic now learned through repetition. When she finishes, the kid runs off toward the bedroom, leaving behind a trail of damp footprints that fade as quickly as they appear. She stays in the bathroom for a moment. The mirror is fogged over completely now. She wipes a clear circle with her sleeve and looks at her reflection. Her face looks the same as it always does at this hour. Tired eyes, slight crease between her brows, hair pulled back without much thought. She notices the urge to evaluate, to decide whether she looks okay, whether she looks like someone who has it together. She lets the urge pass. Instead, she looks at herself the way she looked at the water, without narrowing the frame too much. She sees someone standing in a warm room after a long day still showing up. Someone whose energy isn't endless, but whose care keeps finding a way to move. Someone who has been measuring herself as if she were alone when she isn't. She turns off the light and walks down the hallway, following the soft sounds of bedtime routines. Pajamas rustling, a book being dropped, a voice asking a question that doesn't need a perfect answer. Later, when the lights are off and the house finally quiets, she sits on the edge of the couch with a glass of water in her hand. She takes a sip and feels it move easily down her throat, no effort required. It's strange how much she's resisted ease. She's been telling herself that if she relaxes too much, things will fall apart. That if she doesn't keep track of every detail, she'll fail someone. That if she stops holding everything tightly, she'll be exposed as not enough. But water doesn't work like that. It holds what it can, releases what it can't, and keeps moving anyway. She thinks about the times today she felt overwhelmed, how those moments felt total while they were happening, like the whole truth. And yet, here she is now, breathing normally, the day already thinning at the edges. The feelings didn't last. They never do. She's been confusing intensity with importance, treating every emotional surge as a final statement about who she is. But an ocean doesn't become small just because a wave rises. She rests her head back against the couch and closes her eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to stop scanning. Her body settles into the cushions without instruction. She notices her breath again. In, out. It doesn't feel heroic. It feels sufficient. There's relief in realizing she doesn't have to hold herself together as a single point. She doesn't have to be perfectly calm, perfectly kind, perfectly patient to be worthy of rest. She's allowed to have ripples. she's allowed to have storms. None of it takes away the depth underneath. She finishes the water and sets the glass on the table. A small ring of moisture forms beneath it. She wipes it away with her sleeve, then smiles faintly at herself. Some habits stay. She stands and turns off the last light, the house slipping into darkness without resistance. In the quiet, she feels something steady beneath the usual noise of her thoughts. Not confidence, not certainty, just space. Enough space to hold tiredness without judgment. Enough space to let the day be what it was without turning it into a verdict. Enough space to remember that she belongs to something larger than any single moment. As she heads toward bed, she doesn't try to carry the ocean with her. She doesn't need to. It's already here. He started his night shift the same way he always did, by checking the perimeter, walking the same path he had walked hundreds of times before. The ground was damp from earlier rain, and the air carried that quiet, salty smell that only came from being close to the water. Most people were already home by this hour. Lights on, doors locked. Even the city seemed to lower its voice at night. He didn't mind working when no one was around. In some ways, it suited him. There was less to prove, less to perform. He passed a low fence and paused near the edge of the lot, where he could see the faint outline of the ocean beyond the structures. Far out in the distance, a lighthouse turned slowly, its beams sweeping across the dark with calm precision. The light didn't rush. It didn't blink for attention. It simply did its job again and again without checking who was watching. He leaned against the rail and watched it for a moment. There were nights when he wondered if his own work mattered. Security guard wasn't the kind of job people asked questions about with interest. It didn't sound impressive at dinner tables. When someone asked what he did, he usually answered quickly and moved on. Still, he showed up. Every shift, every weather, even on nights when his body felt heavy and his thoughts wandered too easily toward doubt. He checked his watch. Plenty of time left. As he continued walking, his footsteps echoed softly, steady and unremarkable. He thought about how often he measured his value by response, by praise, by someone noticing. When no one commented, no one thanked him, he sometimes felt invisible. But the lighthouse didn't seem to struggle with that question. It wasn't waiting for applause from passing ships. It didn't dim itself when the sea was empty. It shone because that was its role. That thought stayed with him as he finished his round and returned to his post. He sat down, pulled his jacket closer, and let the night settle around him. The wind moved through the open space, carrying the sound of waves breaking somewhere beyond sight. The lighthouse beam crossed the water again, briefly lighting the surface before moving on. He realized something quietly. Purpose didn't need an audience, and maybe neither did he. He sat there breathing evenly, letting the thought land without forcing it to mean more than it needed to. The night continued. The light kept turning. And for now, that was enough. Later in the shift, the temperature dropped slightly, the kind of change you felt more in your bones than on your skin. He stood up and stretched, rolling his shoulders, then walked back toward the railing where the view opened up again. The lighthouse was still there. Its beam moved in the same slow rhythm, unbothered by the passing hours, tracing a circle that never rushed and never hesitated. Watching it, he noticed how steady it was, how little it seemed to care about whether anyone was counting its turns. He thought about how different that was from the way he lived. So much of his energy went into checking reactions, reading rooms, wondering if what he did mattered enough to be seen. Even kindness sometimes felt like it needed proof. He had held doors open, covered extra shifts, listened when people needed to talk, and then quietly wondered afterward if any of it made a difference. If no one mentioned it, the doubt crept in. The lighthouse offered a simpler answer. It didn't ask the sea if it was useful tonight. It didn't adjust its light based on traffic. It simply stayed on. That realization settled in him slowly, like warmth spreading rather than a sudden flash of clarity. He wasn't meant to shine for recognition. He was meant to show up because it was his responsibility, his choice, his way of contributing to the world as it was, and that was already enough. He returned to his chair and sat down, hands resting loosely on his knees. The radio beside him remained silent, its faint static barely noticeable. For once, the quiet didn't feel empty. It felt complete. He thought about tomorrow, about the small routines that would fill the hour's coffee keys, the familiar walk to his post. None of it felt heavy anymore. He understood now that worth wasn't something handed out by passing ships. It was something steady, built through presence, through consistency, through staying lit even when no one looked your way. The beam crossed the water again. He breathed out slowly. The night moved on, and he moved with it, grounded in the simple truth that doing what you are meant to do, with care and without demand, is its own kind of light. She stayed a few minutes after closing, even though no one asked her to. The clinic was quiet now, the kind of quiet that came after a long day of voices, instructions, and small talk that required constant attention. She moved through the rooms, slowly gathering trays and placing used tools into the metal basin by the sink. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead. She turned on the water. It flowed over the instruments in a thin, steady stream, washing away what the day had left behind. She watched it for a moment, letting the rhythm pull her out of her thoughts. There was a faint ache behind her eyes. Not a headache exactly, more like emotional fatigue settling in. As she sorted the tools, her mind drifted back to a comment someone had made years ago. A sentence said casually, without much thought. It had landed harder than it should have. She didn't remember the exact words anymore, only the feeling they left behind. Small, exposed. She had carried that feeling with her longer than she cared to admit. Even now it surfaced unexpectedly, usually when she was already tired. It showed up as self-doubt, as the quiet urge to over-explain, as the habit of apologizing before anyone asked. She lifted a pair of instruments and placed them carefully on the tray. Metal touched metal with a soft clink. She had tried many ways to get rid of that old hurt, ignoring it, outgrowing it, proving it wrong. None of it worked for long. The water continued to run, and she let her hands rest under it for a moment, warmth spreading across her palms. She remembered something she had once read about pearls, how they weren't created from comfort, but from irritation. A grain of sand entering the shell rubbing against something tender. The oyster didn't reject it. It couldn't. Instead, it responded the only way it knew how, by coating the irritation again and again, slowly, patiently, until the sharpness was no longer sharp. She looked down at her hands. How many times had she done the same thing, wrapped herself in competence, in politeness, in being useful? Layer by layer, she had protected the soft parts that felt too exposed to leave unguarded. She had always thought of those layers as armor, as something she needed because she was weak. Standing there now, she saw them differently. They weren't signs of failure. They were evidence of survival. The water cooled as she turned the handle slightly, bringing the stream down to a gentler flow. She breathed in and out slow and steady. The ache behind her eyes eased. She finished cleaning the last tray and set it aside to dry. The room felt lighter, even though nothing had changed. She turned off the sink. In the sudden quiet, she felt the old hurt still there, but it no longer felt like an enemy. It felt like a beginning. She dried her hands slowly and leaned back against the counter, letting her shoulders drop for the first time that day. The clinic was completely still now, as if it too was resting. She thought about how often she had judged herself for being sensitive, for remembering things others had forgotten, for carrying words longer than they were meant to be carried. She had told herself she needed thicker skin, that being affected meant something was wrong with her. But pearls didn't form in shells that felt nothing. They formed where something had been irritated, where the surface was soft enough to notice. That idea stayed with her as she turned off the lights and walked toward the exit. The hallway felt longer in the dim, but not uncomfortable. Outside, the evening air was cool and clean. She paused before getting into her car, hands resting on the door, and took a deep breath. She felt tired but not drained. She realized then that the old hurt hadn't weakened her. It had shaped the way she listened, the way she noticed when someone else felt uneasy, the way she chose her words carefully. These weren't flaws. They were layers she had built to protect something valuable. For the first time, she didn't feel the need to peel them away. She didn't have to heal by becoming harder or less affected. She could heal by being kinder to the part of herself that had learned how to cope. She started the car and pulled out of the lot, headlights cutting through the quiet street. The road ahead was familiar, unremarkable, and that felt comforting. As she drove, she let herself sit with the idea that maybe her sensitivity wasn't a problem to fix. Maybe it was the very thing that allowed something beautiful to form. Not because she chose the pain, but because she learned how to respond to it. When she reached home, she turned off the engine and sat for a moment longer than usual. No music, no phone, just stillness. She placed one hand over her chest, feeling her breath rise and fall beneath it. The hurt hadn't disappeared, but it had changed. And in that change, she felt something close to peace. They finished the last delivery right as the sky started to fade from gray into that early morning blue. Not quite sunrise, just the moment when the night finally loosened its grip. The van was quieter now. No more route alerts, no more quick stops. Only the soft sound of tires rolling over empty streets. They didn't go home right away. Instead, they turned toward a small park a few blocks off the main road, the kind of park that stayed almost empty on weekdays. A few benches, a looping path, tall trees that had been there long before any of the surrounding buildings. They parked, stepped out, and pulled their jacket tighter. The air smelled like damp earth and leaves, fresh in a way that made the lungs feel more awake. They walked slowly down the path, boots pressing into the ground with a gentle crunch. Leaves had fallen overnight, and each step made a quiet sound like paper being folded. They liked this hour. It wasn't busy yet. No joggers, no kids, no dogs barking, just space. They had been feeling something lately that they didn't know how to name at first. A kind of dull pressure, not panic, not sadness. More like the sense that their life was small. Not in a bad way, just unnoticed. They drove around all day, dropping off packages, following directions, meeting deadlines. People opened doors, signed screens, took boxes, then moved on. Sometimes they were thanked. Sometimes they weren't. Either way, it all disappeared quickly. They had caught themselves thinking more than once. Is this it? Am I doing anything that matters? It wasn't that they wanted fame. They just wanted to feel like they had weight in the world, like their existence left something behind. They reached a stretch of path where the trees grew thicker. The light shifted under the branches, softer and darker, like stepping into another kind of room. There was one tree in particular, massive, old, with a trunk so wide it looked like it had been built rather than grown. Its bark was rough and deeply lined. Its branches spread out calmly, like it had all the time in the world. They stopped in front of it and tilted their head back. The tree didn't look impressive in a loud way. It wasn't blooming. It wasn't colorful. It was simply there. And somehow, standing near it, they felt their chest loosen a little. They remembered something they had read once, a simple fact that had felt abstract at the time. Trees make oxygen. Quietly. Constantly. Without asking to be noticed, they stood there looking up through the branches and let that sink in. The tree didn't need to do anything dramatic to be valuable. It wasn't proving itself. It was supporting life just by existing. They looked around at the other trees, the ones that lined the path, and filled the park like a slow, steady crowd. No one was applauding them. No one was taking photos. And yet the air in their lungs was clean because these trees were here. They took a deeper breath. It felt strange to realize how much they depended on something they rarely thought about. They thought about their own life again. The small things that didn't get counted. The steady reliability. The way they showed up for work even when they didn't feel like it. The way they made sure packages arrived. Medicine got delivered, little everyday needs got met. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. They started walking again, slower now. Not because they were tired, but because they didn't feel the need to rush away from this feeling. Under the trees, the world felt less demanding. They didn't feel bigger. They felt more placed, like they belonged somewhere even without being seen. They sat down on a bench not far from the old tree, letting their body rest without checking the time. The sky had grown lighter now, a soft wash of pale color behind the branches. A bird moved somewhere above them. Leaves shifted gently as a breeze passed through. Nothing felt urgent. They thought about how rarely they allowed themselves to simply exist without measuring the moment, without asking whether it was productive or meaningful enough to justify taking up space. The forest didn't seem to worry about that. The trees weren't competing with one another. They weren't trying to stand out. Each one took what it needed, light water space, and gave back oxygen, shade, and quiet stability in return. That felt important. They realized that value didn't always announce itself. Some forms of worth worked slowly, invisibly sustaining things in ways that were only noticed when they were gone. They thought about how many people depended on what they did without ever knowing their name. The deliveries that kept daily life running, the consistency that others relied on without thinking twice. They had dismissed those things as ordinary. But the forest was ordinary too. And still, it kept the world alive. They closed their eyes for a moment and breathed in deeply, feeling the air fill their chest. It felt fuller, somehow richer, as if their body recognized what their mind was only beginning to accept. They didn't need to be exceptional to matter. They didn't need to leave a dramatic mark. Being steady, being present, being part of the system that allowed life to keep moving. That was enough. When they stood up, their steps felt more grounded, less rushed. The old tree remained behind them, unchanged, unbothered. As they walked back toward the van, the city was starting to wake up. A few lights flicked on. A distant engine started. They knew the day would be busy again. Packages, routes, the familiar rhythm of work. But they carried something different with them now, a quiet understanding that even if no one noticed, even if nothing about their life looked impressive from the outside, they were still contributing simply by being here. Like the forest, silent, steady, essential. The library sounds different after closing. Not silent exactly, but softened, as if every noise has learned to lower its voice out of respect. The air system hums gently overhead, steady and even, and somewhere in the distance, a cartwheel clicks once, then settles. She sits at one of the long wooden tables near the back, the kind meant for quiet reading, not conversation. A small desk lamp casts a warm circle of light over the open book in front of her, leaving the rest of the room in shadow. She turns a page slowly. The paper makes a soft, dry sound, barely noticeable, but it feels grounding. All day people move through the library carrying questions, needs, and stories that don't belong to her, but somehow linger anyway. She helps them find what they're looking for, smiles politely, listens carefully. By the time the doors lock for the night, she feels full in a way that isn't nourishing. She presses her thumb gently against the edge of the page and pauses. Not because the sentence is difficult, but because something in her chest has tightened again. It happens often quietly, without warning. Being open has always been part of who she is. People sense it quickly. They lean in, share more than they planned, trust her with pieces of themselves they haven't organized yet. She doesn't push them away. She knows how much courage that kind of sharing takes. But lately, she's begun to notice how porous she feels, as if there are no walls between her inner world and everyone else's. The lamp flickers faintly, then steadies. She exhales and lets her shoulders drop just a little. The room doesn't react. Nothing collapses when she stops holding herself so carefully. She looks up from the book and lets her eyes travel across the shelves, row after row of spines, each one holding a story that knows where it begins and where it ends. Boundaries, she thinks. Stories are allowed to have them. Somewhere along the way, she learned that kindness meant accessibility. Always available, always understanding, always willing to absorb what others couldn't carry alone. No one ever told her she had to do this. But the pattern formed anyway, reinforced by gratitude and relief, by the quiet praise that comes when you don't say no. She closes the book gently and rests her hands on the cover. The title doesn't matter. What matters is the feeling of containment, of something held safely between two firm edges. She wonders when she stopped believing she deserved the same. The idea of a sanctuary comes to her suddenly, not a physical place, but an inner one. A space untouched by expectation, where no explanations are required and no stories need to be processed or understood. A place where nothing can be taken. The thought feels both comforting and unfamiliar. She has always been good at creating safe spaces for others. Reading corners, quiet tables, gentle rules that protect silence without announcing themselves. But for herself, she has relied on endurance. She pushes her chair back slightly and stands, stretching her arms overhead in a slow, careful motion. The movement releases a subtle ache she didn't realize she was carrying. Her body responds immediately, grateful for the attention. As she lowers her arms, she imagines drawing a line not around her body, but within it. A boundary that doesn't harden her, doesn't make her distant, just defines where she ends and others begin. The idea doesn't feel selfish. It feels sane. She walks between the shelves, fingertips brushing lightly along the spines as she passes. Each book stays where it belongs. None of them spill into the next. None of them apologize for taking up space. She stops near the window and looks out at the dark street beyond the glass. The world continues on its own rhythm, indifferent to whether she is open or closed, giving or resting. For the first time all day, she feels a quiet permission settle in. Not to withdraw from life, not to become unreachable, but to protect something small and essential inside herself. A place no one else enters. Not because it's hidden, but because it's sacred. She turns away from the window and walks back toward the table. Her steps slow, unhurried, as if the library itself has adjusted to match her pace. The chair makes a soft sound as she pulls it out again, familiar and grounding. And she sits without opening the book this time. Instead, she rests her hands on the table and notices their warmth. For so long, she believed that being kind meant being open in every direction like a room with no doors, no walls, no way to close anything off. She thought strength was the ability to stay exposed without flinching, to remain available, no matter how much passed through her. But exposure, she is learning, is not the same as openness. Openness has choice. Exposure does not. The distinction feels subtle but important, like the difference between offering a seat and giving away the whole room. She leans back slightly and lets her gaze soften, no longer focused on any one thing. The quiet wraps around her, not as emptiness, but as presence. The library has always been a place where voices lower themselves naturally, where urgency dissolves into something more patient. She wonders why she hasn't allowed herself to internalize that same rule. Inside her, there has always been a space she never named, a place she rarely visited because she didn't think she was allowed to linger there. It's the part of her that doesn't explain, doesn't justify, doesn't make sense of pain for anyone else's comfort. A place that doesn't answer questions. Tonight, she lets herself imagine stepping into it. There are no shelves there, no words waiting to be arranged. Just a stillness that doesn't feel empty, but intact. Nothing is broken. Nothing needs to be fixed. She feels her breath slow without effort. Protecting this space, she realizes, doesn't mean closing her heart. It means refusing to let every feeling become public property. It means understanding that some things are meant to be held, not shared, not processed aloud, not softened for others. She has spent years translating herself into something digestible. Tonight she stops. The decision doesn't arrive as a declaration. It's quieter than that. More like a gentle internal shift, a subtle repositioning of weight. She doesn't vow to change how she shows up in the world tomorrow. She doesn't rehearse boundaries or imagine difficult conversations. She simply recognizes that there is a part of her that does not need permission to exist. That part is already whole. She stands and turns off the desk lamp, letting the room settle into deeper shadow. The darkness doesn't feel threatening. It feels protective, like a cover drawn gently over something precious. As she walks toward the exit, she notices how her body feels lighter. Not because anything has been resolved, but because something has been released. The constant vigilance, the quiet readiness to receive whatever comes next, has loosened its grip. At the door, she pauses and looks back once more at the long rows of shelves disappearing into the dim light. Each book remains exactly where it belongs, closed when it needs to be open when invited. She smiles softly at the thought. She doesn't need to be endlessly accessible to be kind. She doesn't need to be unguarded to be loving. She doesn't need to give everyone access to her deepest places in order to be real. Somewhere inside her, there is a sanctuary that remains untouched, not because she is hiding, but because she is honoring it. She locks the door and steps out into the night, carrying that understanding with her. Not as armor, not as distance, but as quiet reverence, a knowing that no matter what the world brings to her tomorrow, there is a place within that remains safe, steady, and entirely her own. A place no one enters. And for the first time in a long while, she trusts herself to keep it that way. In the greenhouse, the morning has its own kind of quiet. It isn't the quiet of a room with nothing in it. It's the quiet of living things that don't speak but are still doing their work. The air is warm and damp, and the plastic panels above hold soft beads of condensation that catch the early light like small, steady stars. He walks down the narrow aisle with a hose in one hand, careful not to drag it too hard across the floor. The water inside moves with a gentle weight, and when he turns the nozzle, a fine spray comes out with a soft hiss, like a calm exhale. He waters the seedlings one tray at a time. The tiny plants don't look like much yet. Just thin stems, small leaves, the kind of green that seems almost too fragile to last. If someone who didn't know anything walked in, they might shrug and assume nothing important is happening. But he knows better. He has spent enough mornings in this place to understand how life builds itself quietly, not in sudden jumps, not in dramatic transformations, but in tiny, almost invisible shifts that only add up if you keep showing up. He moves slowly, watching the soil darken as it drinks. The smell is earthy and clean, like the inside of a garden after rain. The sound of water landing is soft but constant, a rhythm he has come to rely on more than he expected. Sometimes he thinks he likes the plants because they don't rush him. They don't ask him who he is. They don't ask what he's planning. They don't ask why he hasn't figured everything out yet. They simply grow at their own pace, and if he is patient and consistent, they respond. Outside the greenhouse, people talk about big dreams, big goals, big changes, big results. He has heard it plenty of times. In passing conversations, in loud advice, in the way the world seems to favor anything that looks impressive on the surface. The message is always the same. If you want something, you need to push harder, move faster, prove you deserve it. He used to believe that. He used to believe that if he wasn't becoming something huge, then he was wasting his time. If he couldn't point to a major achievement, then his life was too small to matter. That belief sat in him like a weight for years. Even now, it hasn't disappeared completely. It still shows up on certain mornings when he looks at the trays of seedlings and feels a strange impatience rise in his chest, like a voice saying, "This is it. This is all you've got." He knows that voice. It's the same voice that makes him compare his life to other people's highlight reels. The same voice that turns other people's success into evidence of his failure. The same voice that calls slow progress stuck. He tightens his grip on the hose for a moment, then loosens it again, reminding himself to keep the spray gentle. Too much water at once doesn't help. It floods, it harms. The seedlings don't respond well to force. He thinks about how true that is for people too, even though it's something he forgets often. You can't pressure yourself into blooming. You can't punish yourself into becoming whole. The plants are teaching him that slowly, without words. He finishes one row and steps back, letting the water settle into the soil. The droplets on the leaves hold their shape for a second before sliding down, disappearing into the base where they're needed. He looks at the smallest seedling in the tray, the one that always seems behind the others. It stands there quiet, not apologizing for being small. And for a moment, he imagines what it might be dreaming if a seedling could dream. Not a small dream, a full dream. A dream of being a tree that spreads wide, with roots deep enough to hold steady through storms, with branches that reach out without fear. with shade that comforts anyone who stands beneath it. The thought makes something in him soften, because he knows that feeling. He has carried a dream like that too. Not necessarily to be famous or admired, but to be solid. To be someone who doesn't break easily. To feel like he belongs in his own life. To wake up without that constant sense of falling behind. Sometimes he wonders if that dream is too big for him. Sometimes he thinks he should shrink it to match what his life looks like right now. But then he looks at the seedling again, thin and quiet, and he remembers something simple. A seed doesn't have to look like a tree in order to be one. It just has to keep going. He turns the nozzle slightly and gives the tray one more gentle pass, making sure the corners aren't dry. The water lands like a soft promise, not hurried, not dramatic, just consistent. And as he moves down the aisle toward the next row, he feels the pressure in his chest ease a little, replaced by something steadier. Not certainty, not confidence that everything will work out. Just a calm understanding that growth is not always visible from day to day, and that being small right now is not a sign that he is failing. It might simply be the beginning. He coils the hose neatly against the wall and wipes his hands on the side of his pants, leaving faint dark marks that fade as the fabric dries. The work isn't finished, but this part of it is, and that feels enough for now. The greenhouse holds its warmth as he moves through it, the air wrapping around him in a way that feels protective rather than heavy. The seedlings stand quietly in their trays, unchanged to the eye, yet already different from how they were a few minutes ago. Growth doesn't announce itself. It doesn't ask to be witnessed. It happens whether anyone is paying attention or not. He pauses at the end of the aisle and looks back at the rows of green, all at different stages. None of them ahead or behind in any meaningful way. They are simply responding to the conditions they've been given, doing the only work they know how to do. He thinks about how often he's tried to rush his own becoming, how he's compared his middle to someone else's outcome, how he's measured his worth against timelines that were never his, how he's mistaken impatience for motivation. Those habits didn't come from nowhere. They came from fear. From the belief that if he didn't grow fast enough, he would be left behind, overlooked, forgotten. But the plants don't grow out of fear. They grow out of alignment. They grow because the soil is right, the water is steady, and the light arrives when it can. They don't question whether they deserve the sun. They don't hold back because another plant nearby seems taller. They just receive what's offered and respond honestly. He steps closer to the smallest seedling again, the one he noticed earlier. It hasn't changed, not in any visible way, but something about it feels more present now. It stands without urgency, without comparison, without apology. It doesn't dream of being anything other than what it already is on its way to becoming. That realization lands gently in him. Maybe the problem was never that his dream was too big. Maybe the problem was that he kept trying to live it too early. A seed doesn't strain to act like a tree. It doesn't harden its stem in advance. It doesn't borrow strength it hasn't grown yet. It trusts the process it's inside of. He places his hand lightly on the edge of the tray, not touching the plant, just feeling the solid frame beneath it. The structure exists to support growth, not to rush it. For the first time in a long while, he considers the idea that he might not need to add anything to himself. No new identity, no dramatic reinvention, no proof that he's doing life right. He might only need to stop stripping himself of patience. Stop crowding his days with comparison. Stop calling slowness a flaw. Stop confusing visibility with value. The greenhouse door opens slightly as a breeze shifts outside, and fresh air slips in cool against the warmth. The balance feels good. Not too much, not too little. He breathes it in and feels something settle. He doesn't suddenly believe that everything will work out. He doesn't imagine a future where doubt never returns. But he does feel a quiet permission to stay where he is without judging it, to grow at the speed that feels true. As he turns to leave, the seedlings remain behind, unchanged in appearance, yet undeniably alive, continuing their work without needing his attention. He knows that when he returns tomorrow, they will have moved forward in ways too small to measure, yet real all the same. And maybe he will too. Because the dream he's been carrying was never about becoming impressive overnight. It was about becoming rooted. Strong enough to stand, flexible enough to bend, patient enough to let time do what it does best. He switches off the greenhouse light and steps into the morning carrying nothing extra with him. Just the understanding that even the smallest seed holds the memory of a forest, and that healing-like growth begins the moment you stop asking yourself to be something you are not yet ready to be. The shop is quiet in a way it never is during the day. The buzzing machines are off, the chairs are empty, and the air smells faintly of ink and disinfectant. The only light comes from a small lamp over the counter, casting long shadows across bottles lined up in careful rows. They stand in front of the mixing station, sleeves rolled up, studying the colors laid out in front of them. Black, white, a few bass tones that look simple on their own. During the day, people come in knowing exactly what they want or thinking they do. They bring photos, ideas, references pulled from somewhere else. Their voices are confident when they talk about their skin, their stories, their permanence. At night, after the doors are locked, the shop belongs to process. They open one bottle and squeeze a small amount into a clean cup. The ink makes a soft sound as it lands thick and slow. Another color follows, then another, each added carefully, deliberately. This part of the work doesn't allow rushing. They've learned that the hard way. Early on, they believed that skill meant precision alone. Follow the formula. Copy what works. Don't deviate. But ink has a way of teaching humility. What looks right on paper can look wrong on skin. What works for one person can fail completely on another. And what feels safe can be lifeless. They stir the mixture slowly, watching the colors fold into one another, changing with every small movement. The shade deepens, then softens, then shifts again, refusing to settle too quickly. Life, they think, does something similar. It hands you pieces without explanation. A childhood that left marks, a talent you didn't ask for, a job you fell into instead of choosing. For a long time, they tried to follow other people's palettes, hoping that if they copied the right combination, their life would finally look the way it was supposed to. But something always felt off, like the colors never quite belonged together. They tapped the stirring stick lightly against the cup, letting the excess drip back in. The sound is small but satisfying, controlled. They hold the cup up to the light and squint, evaluating. Not ready yet. They add a drop of white, then pause, considering. Too much light can wash things out. Too little can make everything feel heavy. Balance matters, but balance isn't a fixed point. It's a relationship. They stir again, slower this time. They think about how often they've been told to be yourself, as if that were a single stable thing, as if identity came pre-mixed, waiting to be poured. But nothing they've lived supports that idea. They have changed with every place they've been, every relationship, every mistake. The colors of their life have shifted, whether they wanted them to or not. What they're learning now is that they still get a say. They don't control what colors show up, but they do control how they're combined. The thought settles into them quietly, not as a declaration, but as a possibility. They wipe their hands on a clean towel and look around the shop. Flash art on the walls, chairs pushed in, tools resting where they belong. Everything is ready even though nothing is happening. This is the part no one sees. The careful attention, the trial and error, the patience to let things become what they are. They hold the cup again and notice how the color has changed, deepened, gained complexity. It's not what they started with, and it's not what they expected, but it feels right. Still, they hesitate. Old habits rise up. What if it's wrong? What if someone else would do it better? What if you ruin it? Those thoughts have stopped them before, kept them stuck in safe, dull combinations that never felt like theirs. They take a breath and keep stirring. The color responds, shifting once more, as if meeting them halfway. And in that small, ordinary moment, something clicks. Maybe their life doesn't need to match anyone else's picture. Maybe it just needs to be honest. They set the cup down on the counter and step back, giving the color a moment to settle. Ink, like people, needs time to reveal what it truly is. What looks finished too soon often changes once it rests. The shop hums softly around them, not with noise, but with readiness. Everything here has a purpose, even in stillness. They lean their weight against the counter and let their arms relax, noticing how their body feels less tense than it did earlier. For a long time, they believed their life should come together cleanly. A clear plan, a recognizable path, a version of themselves that made sense from the outside. When that didn't happen, they assumed something was wrong with them. They tried to correct it by choosing safer options, quieter colors combinations that didn't draw too much attention. But safety, they are learning, can slowly drain meaning from things. They pick up the cup again and tilt it slightly, watching the ink move along the edge. It's richer now, more layered, holding depth that wasn't there before. The color couldn't have existed without every part that went into it, even the ones they once wished away. They think about the parts of themselves they tried to edit out. The sensitivity that felt inconvenient. The curiosity that didn't fit a clear role. The moments of doubt they treated as weaknesses. What if those weren't flaws? What if they were pigments? They add one final careful drop and stir just enough to incorporate it, then stop. Overworking the mixture would only flatten it. Knowing when to stop matters as much as knowing when to begin. That lesson feels personal. So much of their exhaustion has come from overcorrecting, from trying to fix things that were never broken, from chasing an imagined right way to live. They thought healing meant erasing inconsistencies. But maybe healing is learning how to let them coexist. They pour a small amount of ink into a test cap and hold it under the light. The color holds. It doesn't fight itself. It looks intentional even though it was shaped by trial and error. They feel a quiet satisfaction settle in, not the rush of approval, but the steadier feeling of alignment. This color won't be for everyone, and that's okay. Not every shade is meant to be universal. Some are meant to belong to specific skins, specific stories, specific moments. Trying to please everyone only muddies the result. They clean the mixing tools slowly, rinsing them under warm water, watching the ink swirl away and disappear. There's something freeing about letting go of what's no longer needed. They don't need to cling to old versions of themselves. They don't need to defend past choices. They don't need to justify how they got here. What matters is how they move forward with what remains. They label the cup and place it carefully on the shelf, not rushing to use it right away. Some things are allowed to wait until the moment feels right. As they turn off the lamp and prepare to leave, the shop falls into shadow again, calm and patient. Nothing is unfinished. Nothing is wrong. They step outside into the quiet night, carrying with them a simple understanding. Life will keep handing them colors they didn't choose, but they are still the one holding the brush. And with a little patience, a little honesty, and the courage to stop forcing harmony too soon, they can create something that doesn't need to be perfect to be true. Something that finally looks like them. There's a strange kind of anxiety that doesn't need proof. It only needs space. A free afternoon, a wide patch of sky, and a mind that's used to turning everything into a sign. Jason knows this kind of anxiety. It's like looking up at clouds and suddenly seeing something frightening. You flinch as if it's real, even though you know clouds are just clouds. Jason is 23, a community college student working part-time while taking classes. That afternoon, after a long day of lectures, he walks across the grassy area behind campus. The weather isn't especially nice or bad, just a wide sky with clouds drifting slowly by. A light breeze moves through the trees, their branches swaying gently. Everything feels comfortably ordinary. Jason plans to head straight to the parking lot, but his feet stop on the grass almost by habit. A few people are reading, a few small groups are talking quietly, and most of the space is calm. He finds a spot a little farther away, sits down and leans back against his backpack. Not because he wants to think, just because his body needs a pause. He tilts his face toward the sky. The clouds are thicker today, white and gray. Layers stacked together, sliding past the sun and softening the light. Jason exhales. His shoulders drop slightly. Just looking up slows something inside him, as if his mind is allowed to step away from screens and constant notifications. Then, out of habit, his mind starts to draw. A long cloud turns into teeth. A darker edge becomes an eye. A gap between clouds becomes an open mouth. Jason feels himself tense without knowing why. He knows it's only clouds, but his body reacts as if something is staring back. He lets out a small laugh. Not a happy one, just the kind that comes when you realize your own mind has played a trick on you. He used to play this game as a kid, lying on the ground and guessing shapes in the sky. Back then, it was fun. Now it isn't. Now his mind doesn't look for rabbits or boats. It looks for signs, for warnings, for the worst-case scenario. His phone vibrates lightly in his pocket. Jason doesn't pull it out right away. He assumes it's an email from school or a work app. That small vibration is enough to spark a chain of thoughts. What if it's bad news? What if they changed the schedule? What if I forgot to turn something in? What if I'm falling behind again? The feeling doesn't crash down like a storm. It's more like another cloud drifting in, dimming everything just a bit. Jason keeps looking at the sky, but now it feels like a screen, and the clouds feel like lines of text he doesn't want to read. He exhales again, slower this time. Not as an exercise, just the natural response of someone trying not to be pulled away. And in that moment, he notices something simple. The cloud that looked like teeth a moment ago is gone. It's changed shape. It's broken apart. Without him doing anything, without him arguing with it or telling himself it isn't scary. It changed because that's what clouds do. Jason keeps watching. The frightening shapes his mind just created change too. Not because he's forcing himself to think positively, but because the base of it all, the clouds are always moving. When the base keeps moving, the images can't stay fixed. He feels something loosen in his chest, just a little. Like realizing that what scared you doesn't have claws or teeth, only a temporary shape made by light and angle. And if that's true, then maybe many things in his mind are like that too. The monsters of the future, the signs that he'll fail, the proof that he isn't enough. Maybe they're just clouds passing through a tired sky. Jason finally takes out his phone. Not to chase the worry, just to look. A simple notification, a reminder about his weekend work shift. No bad news, no disaster, just an ordinary message. He turns off the screen and slips the phone back into his pocket. He realizes he's done something rare. He looked at reality instead of imagination. He lifts his face to the sky again. This time he tries not to name the shapes. Not that's a monster. Not that's a sign. Just clouds. White, gray, moving, and a light breeze. If you're listening and you recognize this habit of looking at the sky in your mind and seeing only frightening shapes, that's okay. The human mind does this to protect itself. It wants to predict danger. But sometimes it predicts things that aren't real, simply because it's used to predicting. Jason stays there, eyes open, but his body has slowed. No big answers appear, just a small realization some things that look like monsters are really just clouds passing by. Jason stays there longer than he expects. Not because anything special is happening, but because nothing needs to happen. The grass feels soft beneath his back. His backpack just high enough to keep his neck comfortable. Above him, the sky continues doing the only thing it knows how to do, drifting. A thin cloud peels away from a larger one, stretching out like a loose thread. Then the thread breaks and dissolves into the pale blue behind it. Jason watches for a moment, then stops. Not because he's bored, but because there's no need to keep watching. When you don't try to hold on, things pass very quickly on their own. There are still thoughts in his mind. That doesn't change right away. But they arrive more slowly now. They don't crowd in. They don't demand to be solved immediately. Like clouds, they appear, shift shape, and move along. And Jason notices something that feels new. He doesn't have to believe every image his mind creates. A memory comes up how he once worried for an entire week about an exam, only to realize later that the test itself took one morning and passed much faster than all the sleepless nights before it. That memory behaves like a cloud too. It shows up, stirs a feeling, then softens when he doesn't cling to it. The breeze grows a little cooler. Jason zips his jacket halfway up, not because he's cold, but because it feels comforting. The sounds around him stay steady. Faint voices in the distance, footsteps on the path. A bird cutting briefly through the quiet. Nothing is loud enough to pull him out of this space. He closes his eyes for a moment. Not to sleep, just to rest. With his eyes closed, the clouds disappear, but the sense of drifting remains, as if the sky has moved inside him. When he opens his eyes again, the clouds have shifted. The shapes from earlier are gone. Not because he chased them away, but because time did what it always does. Jason realizes his worries work the same way. When he stares at them, they grow bigger, sharper, with teeth and eyes. When he gives them space, they fade and dissolve. Not always quickly, but always with movement. His phone stays quiet in his pocket. No vibration, no glow. Jason doesn't check it. Not out of discipline, but because there's no urge to. This open space, this sky, feels like enough for now. If there's any kind of lesson here, it's a very gentle one. Not stop worrying, not think positive. Just this: maybe you're looking at clouds and calling them monsters. And if so, you might try looking a little longer, giving them a bit more time and seeing how they change on their own. Jason gets up when his back starts to feel stiff, slowly, without regret. The grass is still there. The sky is still there. It doesn't need him to watch over it. He slips his backpack onto his shoulders, feeling the familiar weight, but it doesn't feel as heavy as before. Maybe because something inside him is lighter. On his way to the parking lot, he looks up one more time. The clouds are thinner now. More light comes through. No frightening shapes appear. But even if they did, he knows they would pass. If you're listening and your eyes are starting to feel heavy, let them be heavy. You don't need to stay awake to understand anything. Clouds don't need to be understood. They only need to be seen and left alone. And if you fall asleep while the clouds are still drifting, that's perfectly fine. The sky doesn't disappear when you close your eyes. It just keeps opening wider, quiet, doing what it does best. Listen for a little while, and then let all the shapes dissolve. There are days when Ava doesn't realize she's been holding her breath until her body starts to feel tired. Not holding her breath in the literal way, like underwater, but the everyday kind of holding belly, slightly tight chest, a little constricted shoulders, subtly lifted as if relaxing would cause everything to slip out of her hands. It's a small, quiet reflex, but when it lasts long enough, it turns into a kind of exhaustion that's hard to name. Ava is 29, a flight attendant. She's used to holding herself just right for hours at a time, a smile that's warm, but not too much a voice that's calm, steps that are light and steady. On the plane, everything follows a procedure. And in her mind, everything does too. It just never shuts off. After each flight, when she gets back to her hotel room, she expects to feel lighter. But many nights, it feels like she's still standing in the cabin, still scanning, still on, even when no one is calling her name. That night, Ava checks in late. The hotel door closes behind her, and the room greets her with a familiar sound, the steady hum of the air conditioner, a thin layer of white noise covering everything. The bedside lamp is dim. The carpet softens her steps. Nothing is wrong. Everything looks like dozens of other rooms she's stayed in. And yet when she sets her suitcase down, her shoulders refuse to drop. She opens the suitcase, takes out her sleepwear, hangs her uniform in the closet. Each movement is neat and efficient, practiced into habit. But when everything is put away, when the suitcase is closed, when the key card is placed on the table, Ava notices something simple. She still hasn't let out a full breath. She sits on the edge of the bed. The mattress dips slightly softer than she expected. She rests her hands on her thighs and looks down at her fingers. Her nails are painted a light color, chipped a little on her thumb. A small, unimportant detail, but enough to bring her back into the moment, like a gentle tap on the shoulder. Ava inhales. The breath comes in quickly as usual. But when she exhales, it stops halfway, as if there's a door inside her that only opens part way. She isn't doing it on purpose. Her body is just holding the breath, holding the posture, holding something she can't quite name. She closes her eyes briefly, then opens them again. Not to meditate, just to check where she actually is. In a hotel room, alone. No announcements, no passengers, no emergencies. Just the steady sound of the AC, like a quiet stream running in the background. And still in her mind, tomorrow has already started. The alarm time, the early flight, the shuttle schedule, messages she hasn't replied to. Something someone said on the last flight that she keeps replaying, wondering if she should have responded differently. None of it is a disaster. It's just a lot. And when it's a lot, her body automatically chooses a familiar response. Hold tight. There's a moment when Ava notices the simplest thing of all. She's trying to take in more air without fully breathing out. Like pouring water into a glass that's already full. The water can't go in. It just spills over, creating a mess. And in the body that spill isn't water, it's tension. She places one hand on her chest, the other on her belly, the way she was once taught in a breathing class years ago. Not to do it right, just to feel. The AC keeps humming. The light stays warm. The room remains safe. Then she tries to breathe out a little longer, as if exhaling through a narrow straw. Slow, thin, not forced, just extended. That exhale doesn't change her life. It doesn't erase tomorrow's schedule. It doesn't silence her thoughts right away. But it creates something small, a bit of space. And in that space, Ava realizes she doesn't have to hold everything with her body. She can let the breath do its job. And when the breath is allowed to fully leave, there's naturally room for the next one to come in. She exhales again. This time her shoulders drop a little. Her jaw unclenches. Her belly softens, as if her body has finally received the message. Tonight you don't need to stand guard. If you're listening and you recognize this quiet way of holding in the chest, in the shoulders, in the mind, that's okay. You don't need to fix it right now. Just notice it. Maybe try one longer exhale than usual, like setting down something you've been carrying all day. Ava remains seated on the edge of the bed, eyes resting on the warm light. And for the first time that evening, she feels like she can stay in her body, instead of running endlessly in her head. Ava stays there a little longer. Not because she's trying to do anything the right way, but because there's no reason to hurry. When the exhale is allowed to travel its full length, her body seems to slow down with it. Not the heavy kind of slow, but the safe kind, like when a plane has finished descending and no longer needs to hold speed. She leans back against the headboard. The pillow supports her shoulders, soft and warm. The air conditioner continues its steady hum, unchanged, asking nothing of her attention. Ava rests a hand on her belly, just to feel the subtle movement of breathing. No counting, no timing. Just noticing breath in, breath out. Enough. A thought passes by, a faint image of tomorrow. But it doesn't pull a whole chain of thoughts in with it like usual. It arrives, pauses at the doorway, as if unsure whether to enter. And when Ava doesn't open the door, it leaves on its own. No drama, no struggle. She lies down. The mattress receives her as if it's been waiting. Ava pulls the blanket up to her chest. The fabric feels cool and light. She doesn't adjust the pillow again and again. She doesn't search for the perfect position. She just lets her weight be held. There's a feeling here that's different from giving up. It's the feeling of being supported without needing to do anything else. Her breathing is longer now, not because she's stretching it, but because nothing is holding it back. As she exhales, it feels like opening a small door inside herself, letting out what's built up all day, unsaid words, held smiles, unnecessary alerts. They don't disappear instantly, but they grow lighter, like luggage being set down on the floor. Ava realizes something very simple all day long. She's taken so much in sounds, requests, other people's emotions. But she rarely lets enough out. And a body that doesn't get to exhale fully will hold on to everything, even what it doesn't need. Tonight, just allowing a little release is enough to create space. The warm light spills across the ceiling. The shadows are soft without sharp edges. Ava doesn't stare at them. She lets her eyes stay half closed, just enough for the light to blur. The sound of the AC becomes more distant, like a stream farther away. In that space, she feels her heartbeat slow, not from exhaustion, but from safety. If an inhale comes and feels crowded, Ava lets it come only as far as it can. She doesn't force more in, no pushing. Then she exhales just a little longer, like the tide coming in, going out. The shore doesn't have to do anything. For a brief moment, a thought appears, "I'm okay." And then she lets it drift away without holding on to it. No need to confirm it. No need to label it. A feeling of okayness doesn't need to be gripped to stay. If you're listening and you notice your chest feeling lighter, your belly softer, you can let that be. There's nothing else you need to do. And if you don't notice anything at all, that's fine too. Your breath is still doing its work, even when you're not paying attention. Ava lets one exhale finish completely. Then another. The space between breaths grows longer. Not because she's controlling it, but because her body has found its own rhythm again. In that space, there are no demands, no schedules, just rest. She turns gently onto her side. The blanket makes a soft sound. Everything remains quiet. Nothing is being missed. Nothing needs to be made up for. Tonight doesn't ask her to be ready. If you fall asleep at some point while listening to this story, that's completely okay. You don't need to wait for a sign. Sleep isn't a reward. It's simply what happens when the body is finally allowed to exhale enough. And if you're still awake, there's no need to try to get to sleep. Just keep letting the breath move out softly, unhurried, and allow the next breath to find its way in when it's ready. Tonight, there's nothing more you need to hold. Just breathe out and let everything else arrive on its own. Wherever you are tonight, I'm grateful you chose to spend this quiet time here. If these stories help you rest, you're welcome to subscribe and return whenever you need a gentle place to land. And now, you don't need to do anything more. Let the night hold what you can't carry. And if sleep comes, let it come.